Hey, everybody. Welcome to April 2nd, 6 p.m.'s Tree Stuff webinar. Introduce myself real quick. Joe Aiken, Senior Technical Manager for Arborist. I've been with the company going on 18 years. My role within the company has shifted through the years. I get to do a lot more philanthropic, fun stuff, research, play with trees, take pictures, get dirty, and then jump onto webinars like this, cool webinars, and talk to a bunch of great people out there that I'm proud to be part of. I've been in the business almost 40 years. Arborist 18, had my own tree care company for a while, and worked for one of the oldest tree care companies in the country. I'm also the president of the Arboriculture Historical Society. Some of you guys may have seen me at a trade show displaying some of the artifacts of arboriculture and what we do. And also the president of the Arboriculture Society of Michigan Foundation. So we started a foundation above and beyond just so we can gather funds to put together programs for the industry from funds outside the industry, if that makes sense. So Nick and Kale asked me to jump on. Maybe we'll fill in some time. A lot of us are working. Some of us are not working. I know this COVID-19's got everybody just scratching our head, but we just got to pray and hope that everything's for the best. And I do pray that all you guys out there is, your safety and your family's safety. I'm in Detroit, Michigan, just outside of Detroit. If you looked at any of the maps right now, Detroit is one of the hot spots. Wayne County, which is probably 30, 40 miles south of me, is getting hit pretty bad right now. But my whole family, myself, we're doing great, and we're going to abide by it and hang out and do a few extra webinars and hang out with you guys online. Before we get started, Nick had put up fertilizer and foliage. Honestly, I don't know where he came up with that. I love it, though. Obviously, there was a miscommunication between him and I on what it was going to be about, but it's really not. It is going to be about fertilizer. It's going to be about foliage. It's going to be about a lot of other things. I think that this industry, my perception through the years, going back to when I got into it as an arborist, when I first started and worked all the way as when I was still doing removals and climbing, I didn't give below grade much thought to the overall health of the tree. I was more worried about signs and symptoms above grade. So before we get into some of the new angles and more direction that we're going to be going in arboriculture in the future, I wanted to start there. So we're going to start with soil. We're going to work our way up, and believe it or not, we're probably not going to go much farther north of turf. So there was a great article. If you guys get the Arborist news, there's a phenomenal article in there about some of the things we're going to talk about. And one of the statements in there was that 80%, that's 80% of problems with trees above grade are due to factors below grade. That's pretty astonishing. And there's more and more research going into abiotic and biotic disorders below grade. So before we get into the fertilizer aspect, today's discussion is going to be about healthy soils, healthy trees. And it all starts below grade. So the first thing we're going to talk about is understanding soil profiles. We kind of take it for granted that when we look at the difference between a traditional forest soil floor, most of us we love climbing. We love just putting our hands on trees. We walk around in the woods. There's a huge difference between a traditional forest floor and the urban floor. I couldn't get this down far enough, this chart right here, so I'm going to hold it up so you can see. All the research that's being done on urban soils versus traditional forest soils, the number one thing missing is organic matter. And if you kind of, once we go through this, and we'll spend the first half hour, 45 minutes going through it, you'll kind of, all the dots will kind of link together and you kind of understand how we're getting to this. So one of the best books that you can possibly get, and I'll be holding up some books throughout the presentation. I hope you guys get a chance to jot them down. Most of you probably have them. I think they're phenomenal resources. And one of them is Dr. James Urban. If you don't have this one, Up by the Roots, this book right here is where I got a lot of the information that we're going to discuss. So if you don't have that in your library and you're interested in below grade, and this is a must-have. So take a check through that. So a lot of stuff we're talking through has actually come from Dr. Jim Urban. What was neat is that starting about urban soils, you can kind of look at the presentation on the screen. I got two different soil profiles. The one all the way here is actually your traditional. You have your horizons, your leaf litter, your topsoil horizon, your organic, subsoil, and then parent soil. You have these slow transitions into each soil. Then you check out the center, and in most urban settings, you just kind of go from subsoil to topsoil. So there's really not a lot of differentiation or other horizons within an urban soil. I took another neat doing all this, and then here's if you can kind of see it, there's a chart down here. This is urban soils, part 1 of understanding soil compaction, and it kind of shows the difference of what's within a soil profile. Again, James Urban's article. We'll put this over here. And then if you kind of look over to the very last picture here, this is a lot of times the type of soils that we have to get into. So you're looking at that poor soil. There's a lot of aggregate construction debris, and contractors put these trees in, push us out of the way, and plant a tree. And then years down the road, we get a call, which is pretty exciting. So one of the neatest questions that I've got through the years was, how long does it take to create topsoil? And this might not be on the quiz, but it takes approximately 100 years to create 1 inch of topsoil. And if you, on the earth crust, in most places where there is topsoil, there's a 5 to 10 inch layer of topsoil. So that is 500 to 1,000 years it took to create that. So that whole biology right there took that amount of time, and human activities very often disrupt that. So a lot of the times that what happens with a tree, the overall problem with the tree is our fault. So very cool thing for you to remember. So when you're talking about there and you're trying to figure out how much topsoil is there. So understanding soil profiles. Again, we talked about 80% above ground issues are actually below ground issues. I didn't, until I seen this or read this new article I showed you guys, I didn't think it was that high, but then it makes a lot of sense. So we did a lot of research before I did this to kind of fill you in on how I came up with that. Again, the largest difference between a forest soil and an urban soil is the lack of organic matter in urban soils. Second largest, which a lot of tree care companies are getting into this now, and I'm glad. I applaud you. If you're not thinking about it, maybe teaming up with someone that's doing it, but eliminating soil compaction. Soil compaction is the second most serious issue with urban soils, and it's caused by human activities. Again, I'm going to refer back to a chart. I'm going to hold it up to the camera. It was kind of interesting to see the study that Jim Urban did. And we think about soil compaction, we think about equipment, plywooding into a job. I remember when I was doing tree work, it was never on my wheelhouse that we were plywooding back to a tree to protect the soil from compaction. Back in the day, it was just not to tear up the turf, so we didn't have to fix it on the way out. But when you see this chart, you'll actually see that a lot of the times that the soil compaction is actually from foot traffic because of the weight distribution. So again, this is a great article. If you guys need it, you can contact me or Tree Stuff and I'll get you this one. But if you look at the PSI that's put down in the soil between foot traffic. Yeah, sure. Let me see. The question was, can I get a little closer? Is it climbing up now? If you look at that chart, compared to a tracked vehicle and pickup trucks, high heels is just as horrific for soil compaction as some of the other stuff. So that was a very interesting to see what exactly is causing compaction. So soil compaction in urban environments, it's not only the landscapers, the mowers, it's foot traffic is probably one of the worst. And with heel pressure, high heels, 25 PSI, which is the exact same as a pickup truck wheel. I don't know how heavy the person was in the heels, but good stuff, good stuff. So soil compaction, second biggest difference or problem within the, so we showed you the charts, foot traffic charts. Let me see if I covered everything in this before I move on. I got all kinds of notes because I didn't want to miss anything because this is, I know a lot of it, but I don't want to miss anything because it's this. I get so excited talking about this stuff, so I don't want to skip over anything. All right. So understanding soil profiles and the problems that we have in urban soil. So we already know that compaction and lack of organic matter. Now, I want you to put in the back of your head, because as we go through the next, all the other slides, we continue to talk about this, organic matter is going to come up a lot. And hopefully at the end, it'll all kind of come together. So next is another amazing thing, but I want to talk about, before we step onto it, but I threw this in there. I forgot I had this in there, but if you guys have ever had an opportunity to see Dr. Kim Coder out of University of Georgia present, I'm going to say 20 years ago was probably the first time I seen Dr. Coder present on arboriculture. It was at an ISA conference somewhere, and listening to him speak, and the one thing that stuck with me that he said during that conference and that presentation is that all trees fail. It's just whose lifetime are they going to fail in? And that's one of the things that stuck with me as an arborist for all these years, is that it is a living organism. There's lots of things we're going to talk about, but he's right. They all have potential to fail. And it's us as an urban forester, arborist, tree guy, to determine when and when not is it time for that tree to be removed or be remediated or limb taken off. That's our responsibility. All right, how we doing, Kale? Everybody good? All right, soil biology. This is actually one of my most exciting things. I'm an outdoorsman, I'm a deer hunter, and there's a lot of times that I'll sit down on the forest floor. And if you just sat there as you're waiting for a deer to come by or whatever you're hunting, just watching the activity on the forest floor. So again, we don't talk much about this in arboriculture. I know it's getting more and more popular, and more guys are focusing on it and connecting the dots and realizing how valuable this is. But soil biology, looking into the soil food web. The soil food web is a phenomenal, remarkable little ecosystem beneath our feet. One of the coolest things is that in a handful of soil, and a handful of quality soil, there's actually more organisms in that handful in your hand in healthy soil than there are people on the planet Earth. It's almost hard to fathom that you're holding that much life in your hands when you're holding a hand full of quality soil. There's 200 billion bacteria in that, beneficial bacteria. Another amazing stat is 100,000 meters of fungi, hyphae, in that handful of soil. 100,000 meters. And you think about the 20 million protozoa. If you, I was going to try to put a video in here, but I am not an IT guy and I struggled with it. But there was a very neat YouTube video that showed acorn in the soil growing. And if you looked at that and you looked at, it was such a amazing shot close up that it showed all the microorganisms circling around that as this was breaking open, popping, setting a taproot, and then the leaves in the first branch started to grow. It was amazing, but I couldn't get it on there. So if you're bored, we got some time over the next couple of weeks and you're kind of hanging back, get on at YouTube and check out time-lapse tree growth. It's pretty amazing. So that is just the microscopic organisms. That's not even getting into the mammals, the birds, the earthworms, the arthropods, all the other things that are living within the soil. And you think about that life, that biology, that life, that food web, and all these things are moving around. It goes back to what we talked about earlier. Soil compaction also has an adverse effect on the biology. If you got compacted soils, your organisms can't go from A to B. And if they can't go from A to B, then they start to die out. They have to feed also. They have to feed on organic matter. So you already know that urban soils lack organic matter, and now they compact it. Strike two. So there's two things we gotta focus on when we're talking about soil biology. Another thing what happens is that when you hamper or the soil biology, microbiology decreases within soils, they can't feed on the organic matter that is there, releasing all the elements that the tree needs to absorb to continue to grow. And one of them is releasing carbon, which is the building block of all plants. So again, we're breaking this carbon cycle by poor soils. So we have to get that carbon cycle alive so it can circulate and it can release it so the tree can reabsorb it and the tree can grow. I'm not sure if any of you guys ever did a really cool study is that where you take a seed, you plant it in soil on a scale and let it grow. And then you take that plant out, the soil is still the exact same weight, but then you can weigh the plant. That's absorbing carbon out of the environment for growth. It's a really neat thing to try if you're bored. So try that. Another thing that happens with our organic matter in the urban environment is that society has created this environment where everything's got to be perfectly maintained. So there's a kind of a battle between arboriculture and horticulture. Horticulture has thousands of plants in a landscape and a couple of trees. And now they have to compete with each other. But when we're talking about this part, the natural organic cycle, is that we pick up all the leaves, all the twigs, branches, and we get them off site because we want to have a nice manicured lawn, which is aesthetically beautiful, but we're breaking that natural cycle. Turf is a little different because it has the same requirement year over year, but every year your trees and shrubs are putting out primary and secondary meristems, and not only are getting bigger, but they're getting taller, and the requirements are getting more. And as we pick all that stuff up, eventually you're going to deplete the soil of the elements that the trees required to thrive. So soil biology, pretty amazing. So let's see if I covered everything. Organic matter is the main food source for the dudes. Soil compaction, can't talk about it enough. If you're not into air spading, another good thing we could do for compaction is just a good mulch program. You know, giving the biology in the soil the food source that they need so they can travel up and down within that horizon, and they will naturally aerate the soil. All right. Any questions yet? Everybody doing good? That's because I must be just boggling their brains with all this knowledge. Okay. You guys probably can't hear. I have Kale doing an awesome job. He's on one of my laptops talking to me. If you guys have questions, tap them into the chat and we'll ask away. If not, I don't think this is going to take 2 hours, but we'll have plenty of time at the end to go over some cool things that may pertain to today's discussion or may not. And I'll try to answer whatever you guys have, the best of my knowledge. And if I can't figure it out tonight, I'll figure it out for you sooner or later. All right. So biology. I love biology. And when we get into some other things, I'll explain why. I'm just amazed at what's happening down there. And because technically we just don't see it, doesn't mean that it's not happening. So just keep that in mind. Tree anatomy and physiology. Below grade. We all know there's really not a lot to talk about. There's some really cool things, but roots are such a vital part of the tree. And we really have to understand them a little bit more to understand exactly what they do and what their function for tree success is. The three primary purposes of roots are conduction and absorption. So obviously, through osmosis, absorbing or transferring water and solute elements through osmosis into the root tip, and through conduction, through transpirational pull, having a stream of water from the soil for the rest of the tree through respiration. Storage. We know that in the fall, a lot of the carbohydrates, such as starches and sugars, come back into the main stem, down to the roots for storage. And support, anchorage. We know that in a lot of the work I've done through the years, when a soil root plate fails and a tree topples over, a lot of times it's because it has a compromised root system. And it could have been through recent construction or various reasons why, but also could be of like an abiotic disorder. It could just be the fact that it was too compacted. There's not enough organic matter in there. The roots can't penetrate out any farther. Root plate, still pushing fertilizer on it. The canopy's getting bigger. Root to shoot ratio is out of balance. Soft soils in the springtime, wind catches it, it comes on over. So all things to think about. Anchorage is a very important one. Let's see, what else do I got? Another neat thing, we think about exudates. When a root is growing, those root tips, which are apical meristems, elongating growth, as they're sloughing off that organic matter, and when it secretes exudates, that's actually a food source for biology also. Again, so if your root hair is in compacted soil and it can't penetrate out, almost like a teacup effect, or like a fishbowl effect, where a fish can only grow so big, the root zone can only grow so big. And then you eliminate that growth and you eliminate it in more food source. The exudates, one of the amazing things that it is it helps dissolve chemicals right around that film, right around a root. It helps dissolve those chemicals for tree absorption. So they're a very important process. And that area where that happens is called the rhizosphere. So brush up on that, cool stuff. Checking for soil compaction. We're going to have a break. We got a little commercial coming up in a little bit, and I got some tools I'll show you in a little bit. But as a consulting arborist, me going out there talking to people, I don't do it as much anymore because my full-time job with ArborJet keeps me pretty busy, training and education and just hanging out with cool arborists and doing cool things like saving the world's largest trees. I get to go out there and do some pretty cool stuff with soil compaction. So I wanted to show you a penetrometer, what I keep in the truck, maybe my soil probe, stuff like that. So I'll show you guys that in a little bit. Cool, cover that pretty good. Again, questions, throw them in the chat box. If not, sit back and enjoy. Oh boy. Heck yeah.
All right. I know you're probably going to get into some of this a little bit later, but Autumn Curafel is asking how you feel about composting and the best uses for it.
Yeah. When we get into that's it, I'm building up to it. I love the fact that she's jumping ahead. It's exactly how I am. You hear something, you're like, "Oh, why aren't you doing this?" Or it's a great question. And we are going to cover compost and, believe it or not, compost tea. So if Autumn could be just hang in there, probably might happen after the break. But yeah, we're going to talk about that. I think it's a valuable tool and something we should use more in arboriculture.
Sounds good. I've also got a little bit of talk. I don't know if you were going to touch on this, rock mulch. Your thoughts on rock mulch? And
Rock
using it.
mulch. It's an aesthetic. I was not going to talk about it because I didn't think it fell into the natural, recreating the natural forest floor under a tree. But it doesn't mean that trees can't survive with that. There's a lot of, I don't want to upset anybody, but I've never used it. I've used rocks in different beds, but I'm not sure that I would mulch for the term mulching. If I was creating an environment and that was either the landscape architects or whoever's design to use that as the medium to cover the ground there, then you just got to realize that if you use that, you are going to have to do other additives to keep any of the plant life alive. It gets hotter. There's no organic matter evolved. Again, there's parent material as part of the elements of soil, but that's 100 years down the road. It could be beautiful. It could be there could be a mindful purpose for it. I don't use it very often, but just know that if you're going to use a rock mulch, that you may have to use other additives to apply a liquid organic matter to feed the roots to have a strong, healthy plant. Hope that covers it.
Yeah, I do have one more that I want to get into here.
Sure.
Athena Odell,
Okay.
talking about air spading.
Yes.
that she says, yes, it works wonders. However, it damages root hairs. And asking if you should avoid air spading trees that aren't mature yet.
The question is about air spading. Like I said, I'm just repeating it, Kale, because I'm not sure if they can hear you on the.
Yeah, they can hear me.
Oh, I guess I don't have to repeat it. I'm a big fan of air spading, just like you are. I've transplanted trees with success. I know that the nozzles, both the air and the supersonic air knife, are designed to protect the root hairs the best that they can. You're still blowing air out at 175 CFM. It's coming out there. You're breaking it up. I've had guys use homemade air knives and air spades before with great success. Young trees, I've seen how people have received bare root trees, and I bet you right now that they look worse than if you were to air spade them. And they grow and they survive. It would have to be, for me to move a small tree, it'd have to be a really special tree. And I think I'm with you. Let's plant the right tree at the right time, and hopefully we don't have to move it. But if you do, I think the air spade is probably the best thing to use, because I have been successful on tree transplants with it. Hope that helps. Like I said, I love the tool, and we're going to talk about it. It's probably one of my last slides before we get into fertilize to some of the stuff that I've developed.
Yeah, I know that we've touched on the air spade a lot in our other webinars, specifically with Nick Urea. He's talked about using that. So if anyone's interested in how you can use that as a tool for making trees better and also for making a lot of money for your company, go ahead and check out those with Nick Urea. But otherwise, I'm ready to go on. I'm ready to move on if you are.
Yeah, Nick's awesome. And I've actually, but then again, I've ran into arborists throughout my territory with arborists, I didn't let you guys know, is that it's the Great Lakes in Canada. So I'm North America. I've had arborists that, believe it or not, tell me that, they don't believe in the air spade, I just can't sell it. And I kind of struggle with that, because when we look at everything that we've talked about so far in soil compaction and urban soils and remnant soils and debris, and a quick story is that they transplanted over a 250-year-old oak tree on U of M campus. And for 3 years prior to the transplant or the move, they did it on the pillows. They had a huge tree move. And the company from Texas came out and did it, and they did a great job. The name of the company escapes me, and I apologize if someone's on that was with that company, but it was just amazing how they did it. They air spaded, and that tree planted 200 years ago, once they started breaking up the soil around there to get a drum laced and kind of build that, the concrete, the debris on campus from 200 years ago was just astronomical how much stuff was buried underneath there. So there's a time and place for using the air spade. Again, I'm going to bring out the penetrometer and show you when I would use and when I not, and to what degree is the soil compacted, and what else has to be done on that site. But thanks. Yeah, air spading. Check out the other videos. It's actually a pretty amazing tool, and we're going to cover it more, because I really strongly believe that it's a tool that should be in a good plant and health care company's toolbox if needed. All right, so anatomy, physiology, we kind of covered the roots. I really wish you guys could have seen that acorn grow. And when I was out doing it before I had a penetrometer, if I was doing some tree treatments on a tree, I used to have this little wire. If I couldn't get that wire in the ground, and I would show the homeowner that and tell them that, how is that fibrous little root hair supposed to penetrate through that? That was all it took. It was amazing. So soil compaction, all the documentation that we have shows that it's actually, other than the lack of organic matter, it's the number 2 problem with our urban soils. Abiotic and biotic disorders. So Abiotic, non-living. It could be, and we'll get into some reasons. And biotic disorders. There are things that happen below grade that are living that cause problems below grade, and there's things that are not living that causes problems below grade. So understanding the difference between abiotic and biotic, that is not just for below grade, it's above grade, it's in biology. So abiotic disorders, again, compaction, remnant soil. If you're not familiar what remnant soil is, it's highly disturbed soil. So again, we talked about it takes 100 years to create 1 inch. So if you're in 4 inches, it's a 400-year-old biology. It's 100 years of topsoil creation. And we go in there and we mix that up. That's remnant soil when it's highly disturbed. Another abiotic is girdling root. And it was funny that when I was putting this down, I was kind of chuckling that, is girdling roots abiotic or is it biotic? That'd be a good debate. Abiotic or is it biotic? I'm going to leave that one there and see if anybody wants to chime in on that, because the root is a living part of a plant. The plant is a living organism. So if it's girdling itself, if I was to strangle myself, is that abiotic or biotic? I don't know. That can go both ways. It's kind of a need for a debate, maybe over a bourbon or something. We can figure out exactly which one it is. Grade changing grade. Again, another situation where we've done something to a tree. We change the grade. Boom. Look at these trees right here. These are trees that a customer and a good friend of mine had in northern Michigan. Had a lot of money, wanted to redo the landscape. The landscaper was not an arborist on staff. They changed the grade in the front yard. These were beautiful trees that were right on the front of the house between that and Lake Michigan. And within months after this project, these trees were gorgeous, 100-year-old hemlocks. They started to decline. And it was because of grade change, compaction. If you could see, they air spaded down. That's probably over 18 inches before they even got to the flare on the hemlock. That's how much fill and topsoil they put on top of these roots. That homeowner was so devastated that he didn't know about that, and he could have redesigned the landscape to preserve those beautiful trees. Spent 25 grand trying to save them, and they ended up dying anyways. So grade change, serious issue in landscape, especially when they re-landscape. And there's our girdling root right there. So again, hopefully someone wants to chime in and kind of make a fun joke out of it. Is it living? Is it biotic or abiotic? See what else? Rubble. I put rubble on there, construction backfill. How many times have you guys went to plant a tree or stump grind a tree, and all the stuff that you found around that tree has an effect on a tree? Wire baskets left on, sisal around all that stuff are abiotic disorders. Poor planting techniques. Abiotic, nutrient deficiencies. Another big one that we don't pay attention a lot, we're getting more and more into talking, is soil pH. And we'll discuss more about soil pH when we get to the fertilizer part. And toxic compounds. Sometimes it could be a tree. Sometimes it could be the lawn applicator applying a herbicide that could affect our trees. Toxic compounds, abiotic disorder. Biotic disorders. There could be an imbalance of an insect or a disease, stress in the soil. There could be like a root nematode or a weevil, something affecting the feeding on the roots. Diseases. There are parasitic diseases in the soil. When a soil gets out of balance, bad fungi and bad bacteria could take over and outcompete the good bacteria and fungi. But I will say that overall quality soil management in addressing both abiotic and biotic disorders will help with overall soil health, and healthy soil, healthy trees. Let me see. I did have a very interesting, again, talking about James Urban's book. One of the big questions that I get asked a lot is about mycorrhizae. Endo, ecto, I'm not bashing mycorrhizae because it's such a value to a tree. But there's a chapter in here that talks about it. And I was talking to a great arborist here in Michigan recently. Even today, we're chatting about it. That even Dr. Urban said that if you're not going to address all the other issues with soil, and if just adding mycorrhizal spores to that soil, they probably won't survive. So just adding mycorrhizae is not. And again, I'm not trying to bash it because I know it's valuable. There's such a benefit to it. But if you're not going to take care of everything, then that mycorrhizae is not going to get established. And there's even a great study by Dr. Dan Herms when he was with Ohio State on that. And a lot of the introduced mycorrhizae in harsh climates, harsh soils did not get established. So if you're going to use mycorrhizae, you have to do just about everything else to get that soil nice and harmonious for life, for that spore to attach to the root hair and thrive. So that's all I'm going to say about that. Good or bad or indifferent, there is value in mycorrhizae if you're going to address everything else. Hope that makes sense. All right. Kale, we're about 45 minutes in. You want to take a commercial break and I'll grab those tools, or how are we doing? Yeah, perfect. I'll be right here. I'm just going to go grab a few things. I'll sit back down and I'll watch the commercial on my laptop. So enjoy the commercial. Think of some good questions. Think about the girdling root issue. Is it abiotic, biotic? And I'll see you guys back in six minutes.
We have a bunch of great webinars just like this one scheduled on our Facebook page, so make sure to RSVP to the Facebook event pages for updates. On April 23rd at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, David Anderson of Canopy Watch will be giving a great webinar on canopy exploration techniques and conducting science in the trees. David has some unique experiences in arboriculture, so this is going to be a super interesting webinar. There will be 2 free CEUs available for attendees of this webinar. On May 14th at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, plant healthcare expert Trent Dix will be talking about preparing for the newest invading pest in the U.S., the spotted lanternfly. This webinar will have a lot of important information about battling the spotted lanternfly, so be sure not to miss it. There will be 2 free CEUs available for attendees of this webinar. Keep checking our Facebook events page to stay up to date with all of the great webinars that are on the horizon. The North Carolina Tree Stuff Party has been rescheduled from April until August 1st. It's hosted by Nick Johnson in Waynesville, North Carolina, and will go from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. The Wisconsin Tree Stuff Party has been postponed until later in the fall. We don't have an exact date for the party yet, but we'll be updating you when we have that date on our Facebook events page. For more information and addresses, head to our Facebook events page.
You can also get more information about these and upcoming Tree Stuff parties by going to treestuff.com/parties.
On April 7th, Tree Stuff is hosting a free tree conference call with Craig Bachman on rigging angles and forces. There will be 3 30-minute sessions where you can ask questions, but space is limited. Head to our Facebook events page for more info and to get your free tickets. On April 9th, we'll be doing a free tree conference call with Lindsay Purcell on tree risk assessment. There will be 3 30-minute sessions, but you'll have to go to our Facebook events page to reserve your spot.
Trio Caching is a fun tree stuff program based around searching for hidden treasure in the trees. Volunteer arborists from around the world have set caches in their area for climbers to seek out using GPS, their wits, and their climbing skills. To start trio caching, all you have to do is go to treestuff.com/triocache and find a cache near you. We have a few new trio caches to announce. Brandon Othen of Arizona has set Trio Cache 87 near Phoenix. Sid Howells of Social Climbers in the UK has set up 2 trio caches, number 108 near Southampton and number 109 near Guildford. If you'd like to find these caches or any of the other caches around the world, you can request the coordinates at treestuff.com/triocache.
I'm Carson with treestuff.com, and I'd like to ask you to take a second to learn about the Fallen Families Fund. It's a charity created to provide small cash donations to families who have been affected by the death or injury of a working arborist. All of the administrative costs are covered by Cheryl Inc., so 100% of your contribution goes to help families in their time of healing and recovery. You can learn more and donate at www.fallenfamiliesfund.org.
Keep your mouth shut and your ears open. You've got to truly humble yourself every day and realize that one bad decision will be your last if it's the wrong one.
Never stop learning.
Learn and study a good arborist as much as possible. Watch them, watch how they work in a tree.
You know, get their 2 cents, especially in business. That's been the biggest challenge for me is finding out that a relative degree of skill will not carry me through, that I needed to be diligent as well about the business side of things.
If you haven't already gone to some sort of trade show, competition, whatever, get out and just shake hands with people. You'd be amazing. You'd be amazed how welcoming everybody is and how much they want to be there to help you. It's pretty inspirational.
Don't just take one person's advice, Seek out as much information as you possibly can.
And also realize that it's not a single man sport. This is a team sport. It's a team occupation. And how we interact with each other, and how we make each other feel is just as important as how great you can climb and how wonderful you can rake.
You gotta expose yourself to greatness. You don't settle. If you feel like you're gridlocked and you're not learning, move on and go find somewhere where you can learn and grow, So that's probably the best advice I can give. Soak it up like a sponge everywhere you can get it.
All right. Looks like we all made it back. Kale, did you make it back too? Everybody's good? All right. All right, we're all back. So before we move on to this riveting next section, which is trees versus turf, let's double back to that girdling root issue, because on the break, Kale and I were discussing it, and I want to hear, maybe he could pull up a few comments. Kale, you want to read a couple?
Yeah, I think the first one that I see on here, I think, was Kevin Mabry saying that girdling roots are a biotic reaction to most often biotic forces.
Okay. So my question to him would be, what biotic force is turning it that way? Does that make sense? What biotic force is causing that root? So remember, biotic is a living, and I'm just debating. I want to better. So if you say there's a biotic force that pushes that, go that way. React to tropism, external stimuli, grow. Is there a living organism that would be a tropism or an external stimuli to push that root in a different direction? Okay?
Exactly.
It's a good theory.
Yeah. The other one, hold on. Yeah, I had it here. Here we go. Joseph Kabir Wright. I think a girdling root is an abiotic factor because it's a mechanical effect that you can replicate with other materials like rope, cable, etc. So the fact that it's not specific to an organism or specific to something else, it's that mechanical effect. I kind of like that.
Yeah, that's another great. Like I said, we'll probably come to a better understanding when we're all done. But I'm looking at and I'm trying to think of mechanical. A lot of girdling roots are just poor planting sites. Been in the container too long. The roots are already going that way. We haven't disrupted the roots before we finished the planting. I'm on the side that it's an abiotic disorder, only because I think it's structure that causes a root to go a different way. And I think to classify it as a biotic disorder, again, it'd have to be a living organism that changes the direction of the root. And I'm not saying that there isn't situations like that. My experience with girdling roots is it's always been mechanical or poor planting. That's why this is such a cool question. Any other good ones?
Yeah, I've got Courtney Johnson here, who just plainly put it out. Neither biotic nor abiotic. It's structural, plain and simple.
Done. I guess we're moving on. All right. I guess that's good. Nonetheless, and I'm glad that you guys out there are thinking about this because, we have to explain this to a customer why we feel that it is detrimental to the tree health. And it could be due to various reasons why a tree has a girdling root. We know they're an issue, and we know that we have to figure out how to get to them and remediate them. Air spading is a great way to expose them, do exploration, and we have to eliminate that pressure. The longer you let it go, the more stress it adds to the tree. So that was phenomenal. Great comments on that. And maybe that's something I could do this year when I'm air spading, is kind of try to do a little bit more research onto why did that exact root girdle that way. So great job. Thanks for being engaged. So I went on the break. I went over and got a few things before we get into trees and turf. Is I went and got my penetrometer. Pretty common. Make sure it's right side. Very simple tool to walk underneath the tree while you're talking to the homeowner. They got 2 different points on there. It comes with a chart. Is it compacted? Is it not? It's got a gauge to slide it down. And in that booklet that comes with it, tells you how deep it should go and where you should hit it. Most healthy soils, you lean on that and you better be ready because you're going to fall right to the ground. So it's a pretty cool tool. So pretty inexpensive. Check them out. It might be something to keep in your toolbox to show homeowners the problems. I brought my soil probe, but we'll kind of get into that when we go into below grade and fertilizer. All right, next. The next one I thought we needed to talk about, because we're kind of building up to fertilizer and foliage. But I was at a seminar myself presenting up in northern Michigan, and there was a PhD presenting on turf, and it was probably 95% turf guys in this crowd. And I was listening to him. He was talking about nutrition for turf, nutrition for this, and all those pictures show trees in the very similar to the middle picture. They all showed trees, and I says, well, hold on a minute. So I raised my hand because that's how I am. And I says, well, can trees and turf really coexist? And he looked at me like, who's this guy? You're supposed to be turf guys here. So then he kept on going. Then I asked another question about, is soil more a bacterial-based soil for turf, or is it more of a fungal-based soil? He stopped the whole presentation, said, who are you? And I had explained who I was, and he's like, just shook his head. And he says, no more questions for you. So I dug into this, and this center picture is our world. We are arborists taking care of long-lived perennials with a woody stem, trees within a landscape that has established value, and we've been called in to assess the health of this tree. Can these live together? The answer I came up with is yes, no, maybe so. There's a lot of times, and there's a lot of things we're going to kind of get into, but there's two great articles that explain the problems. This one right here is called Turf and Trees. It's by Dr. Bert Craig, Michigan State University. You can find it online. And the other good one was actually by Dr. Bill Fountain of University of Kentucky. Again, two really amazing articles on talking about this specific subject. So I dug into a little bit deeper to figure out why. So they're both plants. They both are photosynthesizing. And with that said, they are both competing for essential parts for life. And those parts are light, water, nutrients, and soil. And when we talk about they're both searching for soil, they're not only are they looking for soil biology and your NPK and your nutrition, they're struggling for space also. So there is a severe competition between these guys. What I've done is I took it even farther, and this was my discussion. When they asked me to do this presentation, I've been talking to our PhDs on staff. Joe DeColo is our head of research, who has his degree in horticulture. I talked to soil science guys, and we don't have an answer about my last couple bullet points about, is the soil biology different in a turf grass setting versus underneath a tree? Is there a different a life cycle underneath there? And that together so close, is that another competition on survival below grade? And we really couldn't come up with an answer. I did reach out and talk to Dr. Elaine Ingram, Soil Food Web, and we talked about, we'll get into compost teas in a little bit, about, it goes back to a bacterial-based soil for turf and a fungal-based soil for trees, and that is true. So there is a difference as far as the fungal and bacterial base, but is the microorganisms different between those two also, which is something that I'm still scratching my head, and I don't really have an answer for you, but I wanted you guys to think about it as we move forward. So it's soil structure. Obviously, soil structure is a little bit different for each. So there's a lot of competition. So there is competition. Obviously, we're not going to be able to mulch everything back and get this great, perfect root zone around the base of the tree with mulch. Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. So we're going to have to remediate the soil and do things that we can to make sure that that prized tree in the front yard is healthy and safe at all times. All right. So now that we got through some of these things that we want to talk about below grade and soil health and soil biology, we're on a site. Now, there's various solutions. When I was going to first start off, we're just going to talk about your fertilization. But I think there's a trend in the industry to mix up a little from just your traditional day-to-day fertilizer. And fertilizer is a very valuable tool that we use very regularly. We do a lot of soil sampling, especially if the tree that we're working on is a high value and we can't figure out what's going on. We can get a good baseline with a great soil analysis. And a lot of times that soil analysis will indicate a lot of very important things that we can continue to work on to create a healthier environment for that tree. So, deep root fertilization. This has been something that we've been doing for a very long time in the industry. And there's a lot of pros to it. Again, a good soil test if you feel that it's necessary. Another one thing is that's going to adjust, and you probably have all seen the macro and micro element chart and pH levels and where all those elements that the tree needs is available. So with a good soil test, you're going to get pH. So as we're not going to talk about buffering pH other than a few compounds that we're going to talk about in a little bit, buffering pH is a long drawn out process, but may be necessary to get this tree on a rebound and back into to health. So macronutrients, there's 6 of them. I don't think I need to read them out. Your NPK is the very first 3. Your nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. A little interesting story. Some of you guys that may have tuned in on to my Evergreen presentation, and I think it was February or whenever. But part of the study that didn't get published, and it got published in January, the Journal of Arboriculture, is that it was so in-depth that they took half of that research project out and says, no, it's too much, cut it in half. So we had to cut it in half, and we just went to the injection part. But on the backside of the nutrition part, one of the fungus stats in soil is phosphorus. The soil tests that we did underneath these Diplodia-ridden Austrian pines had phosphorus off the chart. It was so available in the soil, but the tree couldn't get it. So we started looking into pH. And when you look on that pH chart, and there is one element that's missing. So this year, what we're going to do, one of the research projects that we're going to do is we're going to try to find a way, either naturally or with a different amendment, is to get the soil to release that phosphorus so the tree can absorb it, so it can be more of an elicitor and treat itself. So this is where all this fertilizer and amendments all come together. We have to come up with a solution. And when our solution needs to be the healthiest thing that we could do for the soil. So pretty cool stuff by looking at that. So you have your 6 macronutrients and your 7 micronutrients that are labeled for tree and shrub. So that's a total of 13, just so anybody can remember. And even if you look and research macro and micro elements, some charts have 11, some charts have 17, some charts have 14. I've always thought 13. So we're talking about 13 tonight for all extra purpose that you know, 13 is the number you need to know. All right. Another great reason why soil testing is important, especially on a new property, something that you've been working. Maybe you got a call from a tree that someone else was working on. It's not coming around. They need some extra help. They call you in because you're amazing. Is that I have this book. Another awesome book. I don't know if you can see that one. Plant Analysis Handbook. So a lot of times what I've done is I've went in here, and every plant that you can possibly imagine is broken down into what it needs for proper growth. So you can take your soil sample to this book and look at what it says it has and what it needs, and you can create a plan by bouncing this across this. A phenomenal resource, just like Up by Roots by Jim Urban. So another great book to, if you don't have it in your library, it's not riveting reading, but it's a great resource for you guys to jump back into every now and then. So check that out. So deep root fertilization, pros, getting the NPK that you need in the soil, which are the top 3 macronutrients. One that we don't talk much about adding to soil is actually calcium. It's the 4th largest, or the 4th most needed element in the soil. So calcium is another good one that we need to look into. Check out your calcium availability on that plant, in that soil for that plant. So it's pretty amazing. So plant analysis, so check that out. All right, we had a question on this earlier. Boom. Compost tea. This goes back a long time. You know, it goes back to farming, ag. Compost is an amazing soil amendment. One thing that I'll start off by saying is that we do have to realize that compost is not soil. So when you air spade or remediate soil or remove soil, you just can't put compost back. You still need topsoil. You still need soil. And then top dress with compost, and then you could top dress with your mulch. And if you kind of see how I did that, you're creating those horizons in the soil again. So you just can't blow that out, fracture it, expose the roots, and throw compost back in there, because that will actually break down and disappear. And then you're going to have higher and bigger air spaces around your root hairs, which are going to cause the root hairs to dry up and die. And you're going to cause in the long term, you're going to cause a more adverse effect to the tree than you thought. So it's a great food source for microbiology. Some of the more common manure, to me, manure has to be broken down almost to its black, powdery, to where there's almost no smell whatsoever. Other than that, I think it's too hot for and too stinky for urban applications. Wood chips, leaf litter. I have a controversy with wood chips on the day that you chipped, especially if there's a green foliage in there, and how hot that will get underneath the tree when it starts to break down. So a good compost is already breaking down and it's starting to turn black, and you got beneficial bacteria and fungi. It's black, it smells earthy. Then it's going to be very beneficial for the tree. And within them wood chips, a lot of times leaf litter, shredded leaves, turn it over, get it alive. And then when you spread that underneath the tree, you're going to get so many benefits by increasing the microbiology underneath your tree. I'm not a big fan of grass clippings for a compost. A lot of times that you can, by adding grass clippings in there, because they compact so tight, you don't have air in there, they don't decompose properly, and you get a very anaerobic response, which means it starts to rot. So anaerobic is a lack of oxygen, decaying, rotting. You want an aerobic compost with lots of air in there and beneficial bacteria and fungi. So if you got a compost pile, try to keep the grass clippings out. Another interesting thing that I've been working on up north is that I have access to a facility in northern Michigan that does a lot of hauling byproduct from sawmills. And over the last 5 years, I got them to separate evergreen, pine, byproduct in one pile, and we did hardwoods in the other. And now that that's breaking down, we did an analysis on that compost, and it was actually phenomenal, the difference in between a hardwood mulch and a mulch and compost that we made with that softer evergreen material. And to the point where if I started my own compost pile again, I started doing this, I would separate it and I would use that evergreen compost mulch underneath evergreens and pines and spruce, and I would use the hardwood under hardwoods. There's that much of a difference in the analysis on that. I don't have it with me, but if you're interested in it, I could probably get you a copy of it to show you what a big difference it was in those two compost piles. Another amazing thing that I got into, like I said, I've been with Arborjet 18 years, and I got into this before I was even here when I had my own tree care company, is compost teas. Compost teas are, again, there's a lot of controversy on it because it's very hard. The biggest controversy is that it's very hard to make the same batch twice. There's a lot of variables that go into brewing a compost tea, from temperature to amount of additives you put into the hopper, how long you brew it, to what you extract and you apply on that. In theory, it is washing all the benefits of compost off of that organic matter, suspending it in a solution, feeding it with molasses to keep the microbes going and other compounds, and taking that liquid applied compost tea to a job site and applying it. When I had my own tree care company, it was based off of that. It was based off of soil remediation. And I will be honestly to say that when I was doing it, I had complaints that I was doing it because everything was growing so fast, and they had actually had to trim shrubs, flowers were bigger, and everything was better because I got the soil alive. Therefore, the plants were healthier and they were thriving. So there's a lot of pros and cons in both of them, but I'm a big believer in compost teas and compost and getting organic matter to the site. Any questions on that? How are we doing, Kale? You're kind of really low. I can barely hear you. I can barely hear you.
I forgot how about now?
Yep, you're there.
There we go. All right. I am going to go back to soil compaction a little bit with Jeremy Leclerc.
Okay.
He's asking, he somehow ended up with a soil probe but lost the manual. So he's kind of wanting a quick overview of how it works and what you're looking at when you're reading your soil probe.
That's a good question. Jeremy, make sure Kale gets your contact information. I'll scan and copy my owner's manual for you, and we'll get you that one what you need. We'll get you that. It's for different soils. There's different types. It tells you about, bulk density and all that fun stuff. We can get you that. I don't know it off the top of my head, but I've got no problem scanning that and getting it over to you.
Perfect. The other one that I have is from Jackson Draney, something like that. He's asking about how much a soil sample will vary. So you've got a tree, you do one soil sample, and you're trying to figure out what nutrients you have in it. How many feet away can you expect to be getting a different soil sample?
That's a phenomenal question, especially in an urban environment. because you're only taking a small dollop out, what I do, because I've done soil samples 10 feet away from me on certain trees, and it's totally different soil profile. So I go north, south, east, and west, a couple in between, and I'll try to fill up a small container. I'll shake it up. I take a lot of my soil samples to Michigan State University. I'll walk them right in. You only get to deliver a small box. So you have to kind of mix it up and try to get the best of all of it in there. Because a tree will absorb what it needs from certain parts of the ground. So it's the best we can do is to get it generalized within that critical root zone. Very rarely do I go all the way out to the drip edge. There's a great chart about critical root zone where majority of the fibrous root hairs are. I think it's 1.75 times the DBH is your critical root zone. Within there is generally where I pull mine. And then, like I said, I could try to get 4, 6, 8 plugs out of there. Sometimes it's hard. You can kind of see my soil probe hitting rocks and crud and junk in the ground. But I try to get that. I'll put it in a Ziploc bag. I'll kind of mix it all up, and then I'll be able to send in what I got. That's at Michigan State. There's other labs out there that have I think I have a bag over here. There's a pretty bigger bag. You could probably put more in. The costs for those are relatively inexpensive. So as far as expenditure towards it, $20, $30, probably with shipping, maybe even cheaper. There's different labs for different costs. It's such a small cost to create a baseline for your customer's property. So yeah, mix it up, get around there, north, south, east, and west, pull a few here, there, mix it up, and send in what you got. Hope that helps. We good?
I think we can keep on going.
All right, let's roll. We just went through the compost tea. Everybody out there, I'm a fan of the natural remediation. I'm a fan of compost. I'm a fan of air spading, and I'm a fan of compost teas. And that's my personal preference. I've had it. I've used it. I've seen the benefits of it. So if you want to play around with it and you got questions, reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to have a coffee and talk to you about how my experience with it is and why I truly believe in it as much as I do. Next, biochar. This is a pretty hot and heavy topic right now in the field of arboriculture. Now, we talked about that article about the 80%. That was actually a biochar article by Chelsea Abbott and I believe it's Davey. They did a huge article on why, what, and when to use biochar. Biochar is a form of organic matter in a charcoal, a form of charcoal. It has to go through a special process where it's heated up, I believe, 600 to 900 degrees without flames, which is called pyrolysis. So then you get these big chunks of carbon. Then you can grind it to certain diameters depending on what your need is. It adds organic matter to the soil. It does help, and it's been proven to help with water and nutrient retention. It is a pH buffer. Because it is a soil aggregate, when worked into the soil, it helps with drainage. And the neatest thing is that if you looked at a picture of char, it's like a little hotel, and it's actually a habitat for microbiology. So there's a lot of phenomenal benefits to this, and it's coming onto the market strong. There's a couple of really big companies out there. Arborjet has a phenomenal product that we're attaching different elements to. It's something that if you're not looking into, you may not be ready to use it yet, but I think it might be something that you, in the future, might be a great addition to what you're doing on your customer's property. So compost tea, and biochar, it's more of a, I don't want to say, someone brought up the word holistic one time to me. I think holistic has a bad persona, even though it's a good term, trying to be holistic, but more of a natural remediation to get the soil back to an urban or a forest floor. So biochars are another good one. Some of the other soil amendments, some of them we've been using for a while, and some of them that you may not be. Humates, which is a form of liquid carbon that's come from the ground from thousands of years ago, tens of thousands of years. It's been mined. Seaweed and kelp, very beneficial for plants and trees. Lime. Lime is a soil additive if you are buffering pH. Different other minerals. There's all kinds of great things that you can be putting in the soil. Bone meal has been an old one to kind of help with acidic soil. Gravel, vertical mulching. Guys are still doing that by leaving soil compaction, and that may be what you have. You're using a gravel or an aggregate throughout the root zone to aerate the soil. A lot of great research on that. And believe it or not, it's beginning endless on things that we're trying and working on to try to remediate and bring the health up for urban trees and soils within an urban landscape. Let's see if I covered everything. I think so. Yeah, we talked about how many micro elements, the biochar, all that good stuff, a lot of great stuff. Let's go to soil fracturing. We've had a lot of great discussions on this already. I have moved trees. I've had excavated utilities with it. Collar excavation. The interesting thing is the question was that you feel like it's damaging root hairs. And the whole design in the supersonic nozzle was to not. I think if you're just looking for a girdling root, you can probably work around the base of the tree with just a hand trowel very effectively. But when you get out for that whole root plate, it's very hard to do with anything other than an air spade. I have argued with others that, oh, we can do it with a shovel, we can do it with a spade. I'm like, yeah, but every time you puncture that into the ground, are you damaging roots? And that was the gray area. Yeah, you can probably break the surface tension, especially if you got a real tough, hard soil on the top. Water can percolate in with a shovel, but I still think that air spading is the way to go. And exploration. If you're not sure what's going on down there and everything you tried, you just can't figure it out. Flat spot on the side of the tree, it's a great tool to get in there and explore what's going on, especially if on a special, a very important high value tree. All right. Cripes, 7:30 already. Sorry, hope I'm not rambling too much. So with all that said, with all the soil amendments and the research and things we got going on and soil profiles, with my position with an ArborJet, we got to sit down one day and I says, we got to do this, we got to try this, and we got to give the industry something to remediate everything we talked about on this list. So we looked at our partner Ecologel and their BioPro line, and we created a program called ArborRx. And ArborRx comes from, it's a prescription that you write for that landscape, tree, whatever you're working on. And the compounds that we put within that ArborRx address everything that we talked about on the solution chart. Nutrition, soil enhancement, planting establishment, and soil moisture management. All this is in this program, and it's all available to you through Tree Stuff. And, you know, starting off, we came up with a little application instruction. We got tear-off pads that you can give to your customer. It looks like a prescription pad. Some marketing. They're actually pretty cool. We came up with application instructions for you, so it was easy for you to come up with a solution, figure it out, look at the rates, and be able to cost effectively bid that job quickly. If you look across the top on this chart, it all has things that we talked about, and it all has a product that we recommend to use for that. Really amazing. I'm an arborist by trade, and I told them to put it together. And the first couple runs that they put this together, I couldn't understand it. And I says, and I'm not saying that you guys couldn't, don't take that the wrong way, but 40 years in the business, I'm an arborist. I love tree care. I love what I'm doing. And if I have a hard time understanding and following it, I don't want anybody out there to have a hard time. So we came up with these really easy to follow when you're looking at a property and what's the condition on that site, what we can recommend to help with that remediation. It's based off to an Arborplex fertilizer based for 50% slow release nitrogen. So if there's an NPK issue, we have a real good water soluble, no agitation, great fertilizer, safe on your equipment. I'm going to go through these real fast because we're getting late and I want to have time for Q&A. But so we have a really great buffered fertilizer for your nutrient macro micro issues. This is actually one of my favorite products that we're bringing to the arboriculture market is BioMP. We talked about microbiology. In one of the compounds that I've used for 30 years to help with microbial health is molasses. This is a molasses-based soil conditioner helping feed the soil microbiology. It's getting the soil alive. Phenomenal product. I've been playing around with it for years with some amazing results. Enviroplex. Humic acid. We talked about humates and humic acid. It's another form of liquid carbon that we can get into the soil. Again, helps with soil compaction, soil retention, moisture management. It's a liquid carbon source. Another amazing product that's available in the arboriculture now. Iron Plus, which is part of a seaweed extract, but it has a high iron base, designed specifically for chlorotic trees, primarily your oaks and chlorosis. Another great product specific for chlorotic trees. Nutria Root. Nutria Root was a product that we took a lot of these compounds and put them all together. So if you're doing a lot of planting, this has a small NPK, it has a soil moisture management component, and it has the humates and everything designed, surfactants, to actually help with that plant establishment. Hydrate. This is a very interesting compound. It's different than anything I've played with in arboriculture before. It's not a gel. It's not a heavy molecule. It's a humectant hydroscopic humectant that attaches through evapotranspiration. So as a tree transpires or a plant, it pulls it to the root hair and holds it there as a molecule. And it's like a positive negative charge in the soil that as that water evaporates through the soil, it's like a magnet. It's pulled and held in droplets around the root hairs to prolong moisture retention within the soil, which a lot of times issues that we have, and you're going to get 3 months out of moisture management control. That's a lot of problems that we have within the urban landscape. So something to look at if you're having drought issues in certain climates within the country. Cytogrow, cytokines and auxins, phenomenal things to stimulate root growth and development. We're developing all these products for arboriculture through this Arbor RX program. So everything that we have an issue for, we try to address with a compound that you have available to you. C Extra, again, we talked about seaweed and kelp and its benefits within the soil for a food source for your microbiology. A little bit about the research, which is amazing that we get to play with this stuff and we get to do side-by-side trials and, oh, this looks great and everything's wonderful. I'm really impressed with how well this stuff is actually really working. Even the Arborplex fertilizer with other traditional fertilizers plus what we developed and its effect on the soils and the plant. Again, healthy soil, healthy tree, healthy foliage. So it's a big symbiotic relationship between the root and shoot. We're trying to address below grade a little bit more so we don't have to rely on issues happening above grade. We'll also help you. There's our little prescription pad. I'm going to get a stamp so I can, like a doctor, I can just stamp it if I was working with you. Check off what you think, a little prescription. We're willing to help you with this marketing campaign. If you're interested with any of this stuff, get hold of Tree Stuff. We can work with you and kind of help you along that path. We have a phenomenal team. These are hort people, cannabis. Again, we're into cannabis now, which is kind of, I don't know, kind of cool. I like the fact that we're trying to branch into all plant divisions, and we have amazing compounds that can help in every situation. So the cannabis is something new for us. So I'm excited to see where that goes. Here's all our reps. So depending on where you're at in the country, get hold of Tree Stuff. They can get you in contact with anybody. This is me. You guys are, as though I have a new role. I take care of the Great Lakes in Canada, but my new role is working with accounts nationwide. You can call me with a tree care question anytime you got a question, or if you want to tell me that I was wrong or whatever you want to do, I'll listen. I'm a pretty good listener. So that's all my contact information. One last thing I wanted to kind of let you guys know what's coming up in the future for myself and ArborJet is that some of our compounds that I showed you, I'm actually starting a new division, which is going to be the wildlife management division. If any of you guys are deer hunters, food plot establishment, we're going to start working on some trials with that this year. Compost tea for trees. There's not a lot of data to support that other than my peer-reviewed positive experience with it, but I want to actually document some on it. Our soil amendments and its effect on disease suppression. That was part of the Diplodia study that I did with Michigan State, that some of the overall effects on suppressing Diplodia was actually some of the best results were through nutrition. So I need to figure out exactly what was going on. We're going to do more with Biochar. Again, read the Arborist news. It had some phenomenal discussions and how they applied it. And then I'm working on, we talked about it a little bit, about gradually rebuilding soil horizons in the urban landscape. I have some compounds and some materials that I've been working with that hopefully I can start to show the biology and how those organic layers that I staggered, how well they benefit arboriculture. So that's all I got. It's 7:38. I am going to leave this one up for you. Again, please grab, the easiest way is go ahead and send me a text, email. If you call me, I might answer, might not, kind of like that. But if I get your message, I will return your phone call. If I don't be afraid to be a squeaky wheel. Call me again. I got 8,000 customers throughout North America, but your questions and your comments and me helping you is very important to me. So keep trying and I'll be there for you. Kale.
Yes.
Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Anything?
Can you do a few questions?
Yeah, let's rip.
Alrighty. Let me find this one here. Oh, while I'm looking for this, where are we on getting the Arbor RX to market and registered with states and also availability in Canada.
Oh, Canada. Ha! Good luck. There are some compounds that our distributors are helping us try to push along. You're probably a year to 18 months in Canada. States, it's registered all across well, I'm not going to say 50 states. 99.9% of the products and the states are all registered through all the ArborRx products. We didn't want to launch it. We're working on the launch with our distributors. So you kind of getting the launch before the launch. But it's just so exciting that I wanted to share it with you guys tonight. The products are all registered. They are available, and they will be available through Tree Stuff.
Okay. Here's my first one. This is actually from quite a bit earlier, and I'm sorry, I'm definitely going to butcher your name. I think it's Nikia Keebler. She's asking specifically about managing urban trees in abominable situations, like a 3x3 plot or a 4x4 plot, underneath a concrete sidewalk, stuff like that. She says there seems to be a lot of talk about not shocking trees with fertilizer. I know, as somebody who's not the exactly the expert on this kind of stuff, I'm still more of a layman. You're always afraid of getting of putting too much fertilizer in.
It's a phenomenal. It's actually an amazing question, a phenomenal question. There's a lot of debate, and I'm not bashing fertilizer, but there is a lot of debate that soils don't need fertilizer. And I'm saying that on the other side of getting a soil sample, but you are going to be in situations where, it's not a fertilization issue. Those containers are more of a abiotic problem. How's that? And you're going to need to try to create that healthy soil. And it's going to be liquid organic matter. It's going to be carbohydrates to feed the microbes to keep it soil healthy. The great thing about that is that there's going to be a tree site life expectancy. It will outgrow that container underneath the sidewalk and eventually, but during its time life in that area with some of those compounds that we talked about, one of them being a soil moisture management included in that, I think you could do a great job with overall health without the shock, I'll use your term, the shock of NPK. NPK is very important. Those macro and micro elements are very important. If they're not available to the tree, then you may have to. But if they're available and it's just not, the tree's not getting it, the biology in the soil will release it so the tree can get it. It may be a safer, softer alternative to a traditional fertilizer. Great question.
Sorry, I was just talking to myself over here. I was muted. That question actually, that led me into a question that I have. If you do have someone who's put too much of some sort of fertilization into their soil, they do kind of have that shocking or like burned out factor. What can you do to fix that, to help that out?
Well, pray that you don't burn enough of the root hairs. A tree will only absorb what it needs. So that's a good thing. But if it's there, it takes time to leach past that root zone. There are compounds that we use. It's called NAX. That's a salt flush, because a lot of these compounds act kind of like a urea, which is kind of very similar to a salt. You can do an NAX flush that will encapsulate it and force it away from the root zone. Other than that, it's got to be water. It's got to percolate through that. You got to get it past it. So good hydration, hydratain, keep the soil moist so everything can leach through. The most important thing is just, man, read the label and be careful. Hope that
Yes.
hope that helps, Kale.
It did. How about, let's do Dan Kohler. He's asking about the best time to inject a pine or a spruce with good uptake.
Well, because it's a trachea vessel tree, I think I must have injected tens of thousands of spruce, pines, hemlocks over the last couple of years through all the research. I'm finding, depending on exactly what you're targeting, it's a trachea vessel tree, so you're talking about 4 times smaller in diameter than any of your deciduous trees. So, and most of the compounds that we're going to inject into a conifer are some of the thickest stuff, like an emamectin or a propiconazole. I found, even through the research, the best time is fall. I love, and the reason I started the whole project because I was trying to find out the best time for me to inject for diplodia. And the first time I tried injecting a resinous conifer during candle elongation, there's so much resin pressure in a resinous conifer that it exceeds most of your injection equipment and actually backflows back into your system. So with working with Michigan State, we found out that think of it as molasses in the winter. Resin ducts flow alongside of your xylem. They're not intertwined. So when you go do an injection, you need to be around 45 degrees in the fall with no frost, so your soil temp's still above 45. Resin will not flow at that degree, and you can inject all day long. It doesn't help you now, or it might be too late, depending on where you're at, to get product in. But if you were going to have to, you'd have to drill, inject like right away. Within a minute, the resin is in that injection site, and the injection site's shot. So in the nitty gritty, I would, because we're getting late already the season, I know we're in kind of a weird situation right now with essential services. By the time we can get out there and do nutrition, it might be too late for a trunk injection in resinous conifers. I would say jump into a soil applied or a foliar like you've been doing, and then schedule that trunk injection or stem injection till the fall.
Kind of piggybacking off of that one as well. How much do you have to think about weather and temperature systems when you're thinking about fertilizing or amending soil and getting your micronutrients and your macronutrients in?
Micro and macros, I think you're safe to get those in early before the tree's even starting to move, because a lot of them are designed to be slow release and hold within a soil. You're going to get them in the soil before the tree starts to put out foliage. There's a lot of debate on spring or fall. I think you see great results on either or as far as your micro and macros. Now, as far as microbiology, if you wanted to put something in to stimulate that, there is a threshold. It has to be spring. It has to be warm enough for biology to move, earthworms to start moving. I don't know the exact temp, but I will tell you that the soil temp in Michigan is around 50 degrees. We don't have any snow anymore, and we had rain last week, and I seen the biggest earthworm time. My kids thought it was a snake. So I think that you could start putting amendments for soil biology down right now. And there's really no bad time to do it throughout the year, because it's very gentle on the environment and the root zone within that tree.
Okay. Citric acid as something to reduce soil pH. Have you heard of this? What's your views on this?
I have not. Soil pH has came up. I was talking to one of my old professors last year. He retired and gave me all of his books and literature. He shut his office down, said, F it, and he's called me, Joe, for the museum. Do you want everything? And I backed my truck up and I got everything. And when I was talking to him about that, with today's technology, there has to be a way to create a compound that helps with soil pH. And I don't know, I've never heard of anybody trying that, but man, who's to say it's not or doesn't help with it? I know that when looking at micro charts and pH scales, you know, most trees thrive within 5.5 to 7. So 7 is neutral. So a lot of the compounds that we know of right now, like lime, char, microbiology, neutralizes pH over a period of time, which brings us closer to 7. But if that was a compound, and because it's citric acid, I know that, you know, you think acetic acid and vinegar, and is there a natural compound that can help with that? I would love to try to figure it out.
Now on that, because you've been involved in a lot of research, do you have, and we have a lot of people here who are obviously very interested in a lot of this research. We had a lot of people talking about your story about the hardwood mulch versus the evergreen mulch.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for people doing their own kind of experiments at home?
I think me as an arborist, I got to see it to believe it. And I know that's probably resonates within our industry. Before I worked with ArborJet, again, ArborJet to me, again, this is me. I don't want to, I'll cover my badges wherever they are, is very open to experiment and trial to create the right product for the right problem. There's all of us go to trade shows, all of us go talk to guys, and there's some amazing product reps out there, and you got to grab compounds and you got to play with them yourself. The mulch thing, I've been using a product, and then we could talk about it offline because it's not even our product, but offline, I think it's almost a miracle for disease suppression in plants. It's because I played around with it and I've seen the results within trees. And I've had the opportunity to see it, and I've used competitor product within research projects. But you got to touch it. You got to play with it. I'm a big fan of Alex Shigo. To know a tree, you got to touch a tree. Getting out there and counting terminal bud scars and measuring leaf growth. And you got to be a dork, or I shouldn't say dork. I guess a dork. You got to be a nerd for the industry. You really got to love what you do. And you got to get out there and you got to get dirty, and you got to experiment on your own property, your mom's property, or anybody will let you. You got to get out there and play around with it. If there's something that we have that you want to experiment with, let Tree Stuff know. Get me an email, and I'll see if I can get you some trial sizes to play around with. I believe in this stuff, but you're going to have to play with it and believe in it yourself. So if I can help you do that, I'm all for it.
I think I've got a few ideas of future webinars for you to do in that area. We have David Anderson coming up. He's doing science in the trees, or like in the canopy. So I'll talk to Nick about doing a science on the ground sort of thing.
Yeah,
I think that could be fun.
like a diagnostic science. What are we looking at?
Exactly.
I love the science in the canopy. It's the thing I've been now. I'm track certified, but level 3 on check means you have to get off the ground. I'd love to have something more for your climbing arborist to be able to understand insects and disease signs and symptoms while they're climbing. So that's a phenomenal one. I like it.
I've got, let's see, one more here. We got about 5 minutes. Logan O'Shell, going way back to talking about grade problems, seeing trees with raised planters at the base, and how this affects the tree as if you're going to raise the grade across the drip line.
Well, I've seen planter beds installed around trees. There's a specific zone where tree roots grow. And then you start changing that after a tree is established. Trees need oxygen. Roots need air. They need macro and micro air spaces. You start changing grade and you eliminate the zone where those roots are thriving. And you start to eliminate those pore spaces for air and percolation and water. And then it creates the roots to change a direction. When you change the grade around a stem, there's latent buds. And because there's a root to shoot symbiotic relationship for roots, there's the same side, not symbiotic, but I'm having a brain fart on the term, but there's a relationship between the root to shoot. You start changing the grade and you still have that foliage up there, the tree has to put out roots. It has to support its crown. It's going to put out latent buds higher above the root flare. It'll cause rot, decay. You'll start to lose some of the protection from the bark, and you'll lose that cambial section once you start changing it. One of the only things that I've seen that's been successful is leaving the root plate exposed, because that's the majority of your fibrous root hairs, and then changing the grade past that. I've seen that very successful. But the opposite way can be pretty catastrophic. It may take 5, 10, 15 years, but you are going to have issues with it over the long term.
Muted again. All right. One more. Well, I guess real quick, Joe Janega was asking if that evergreen mulch worked better to adjust pH than the hardwood, if that was what you saw.
I think if you're applying it, because the pH was different, and because that was breaking down with biology that was designed to break down that specific organic matter, the pH was very similar to what this analysis book said the pH should be underneath that tree. We plant evergreens in berms because that's what the homeowner wants. And 9 times out of 10, it's not an arborist that's doing it. It's a landscaper that gets the job. He builds a berm, sticks trees in there. When you put that compost in, you are changing the pH, if you separate it, to the pH that tree requires, if that makes sense. You're not buffering it to a neutral. You're creating the pH where that tree can thrive.
That makes sense. And then I think that's pretty good. We have Jeremy Leclerc's asking about using your air spade after something's actually taken root for general proper root zone management, and what you put in, what you do after the roots are exposed.
After the roots are exposed, I mean, after you air spaded it.
After you've air spaded, yeah.
Well, the first thing is that after you expose those roots, you got to have a plan right away because you can't leave them exposed very long. Because you're fracturing, a lot of the times when I was doing a big remediation, you had all the compounds that you're with. You had your bags of topsoil. You're getting it all covered right away. And remember, you got to water it in. It's got to percolate in there and self-compact. Let me see. I'm curious. Arborist goes out and doing what they have just discovered. What now? All right. That's a good question. What you find is almost probably endless. Obviously you're gonna locate girdling and crossing roots. You can do that right away. You could find that the wire basket's still on. You can find bricks. You might find Jimmy Hoffa. Shoot, I don't know. There's so many things that could be wrong underneath that. I'm not a fan of just air spading to air spade. My last job that I helped on is that there was a calcium chloride truck in a dirt road in rural Michigan that a homeowner said that the truck stopped at the stop sign in front of his house, left the pumps running, and sat and took a phone call for 15 minutes and flooded his front yard with calcium chloride.
Ooh.
So I helped a tree care company out there with some products that were designed to flush that compound out, but then we used a BioMP and try to stimulate any roots that were left. I applied that with an air spade because I wanted to break up the soil to get that product into the root zone and not just top dress it. So there's things that you can do while you do that. A good soil moisture management product would be good if you're doing an exploration. Get that in there to hold moisture in there to get everything reestablished. So there are things that you could do. Again, topsoil, organic matter, mulch. Create your horizons when you backfill.
Great. I think we're about ready to wrap it up. I want to thank everybody for watching, commenting, and sharing. This will be up on YouTube probably tomorrow. The quiz is going to be posted in the comments as well on our Facebook page. And if you pass that quiz, then you will be entered to win you'll earn 2 free CEUs. It may take 6 to 8 weeks for TCIA to update that. So just please bear with us. It does take a little while for that to happen, but we'll get that going. Do you have anything else for them?
You know what? Like I said, as long as I've been in there, there's a couple other books I'll show real quick. If you're interested in Compost Tea, Teaming with Microbes, it's a great read. Urban Soils, be a lifelong student of the industry. I'm still learning stuff every day. It's amazing how much is out there. And then when you start asking questions, you start realizing how much is not out there. So the one question from the field was, how do you play around with this stuff? I'm still doing it after all these years, and we're continued to find solutions that are safer for the environment and your customers' properties. Play around with stuff. Get out there, touch trees, get around. Attend your local seminars. Just be involved. Like I said, I'm such a dork for trees. Like I said, I became the president of the foundation, and I started a museum of arboriculture. And generally, I would have this camera facing the other side of the workshop where all the history is. But I didn't have a Ethernet cable long enough to reach that far, so I apologize. But be involved, enjoy it, love what you do. And again, I'm always here to help if you guys ever have a question.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much. And we are going to get out of here.
Peace out. Thank you, everybody who tuned in.